The madness is upon us. Hey, this is the Pick Six Podcast. I'm Evan Bland with Sam McKewon and Tom Shatel. And this is a little bit of an earlier meeting this week with so much going on in the world of college basketball. Omaha, if people don't know or had forgotten, is hosting some NCAA tournament games this weekend. Iowa State's going to come to town and take over the place. Nebraska men, Nebraska women, Creighton men and women also out and about in the tournament fields the next couple weeks. Guys, it feels like we're taking like our collective deep breath before plunging into whatever's coming up.
It definitely does. It definitely does. I'm so looking forward to all the coverage that we'll have. Wilson and Tom in Memphis, and John obviously covers Creighton, but he'll be out in Pittsburgh. And then we have the NCAA tournament here. And oh, by the way, pro day, quietest pro day that I can remember, and then spring football begins next week. So everything is kind of on top of us. And I love that it's basketball. I love that we don't have to talk about every single little detail about a football team we already know a lot about, and we can talk about something else. I think that's great.
Tom, how does this one compare just in terms of how much is going on locally to what you've gone through before?
Well, very rarely have we had Creighton and Nebraska together. It happened in 10 years ago, and they went to the same place, San Antonio. But we didn't have they hosted in 2012 and 2000. I think it was 15. So we weren't hosting. So yeah, this is crazy. It's great. It's what you want, and I've got my toothbrush packed. Oh.
Okay, so the draws come out Sunday night. What was your guys' reaction that Nebraska, not just in the men, but and the women, get Texas A&M? And beyond that, like I think you can kind of fit into one of two schools of thought where you can say, okay, this is juicy, it's a revenge game, whatever. But then I think there's the other side that's like, man, this has been about the teams all year, and does this storyline sort of take away from what they've accomplished? Where do you guys come down on kind of figuring out how Nebraska got matched up with the Aggies twice?
Evan, there's no conspiracy. It's not how that works. I mean, it's get 10 people in a room. They started Wednesday night. They're in a giant ballroom suite thing at the top of a hotel in Indianapolis. They're sitting in front of a laptop for 12 hours a day. They're going through reams of net rankings and analytics and all that other stuff. They're watching games. They're eating M&Ms and ice cream and all kinds of stuff. They're basically Sunday morning is when they do the bracket, and there's a program. I went through they have for several years the NCAA invited media to come in and go through the process. I was the president of the basketball writers in 2007, the first year they started doing that, so I got to go do it. And they had 12 of us or 15 of us in this room. They took us through. It was for a 1 day, basically day and a half, and then they took us through the whole process. The very last thing they do Sunday morning is they put all the teams in a bracket. They've had everybody seated. They've got them all figured out and washed and scrubbed and all that other stuff. And there's a program. There's like a computer program. They just start putting the teams in where they're seated. And the only thing that they don't like to do is have conference rematches early in the tournament. So if you think you're going to have, or like another rule is like Creighton is hosting the regional this week in Omaha. Well, then they can't have Creighton can't play the same day as the games here, or so I thought. They're playing Thursday. I guess that rule's over with. They want the Creighton people who are working the regional to be able to watch their team. Well, they can't do that this week, so I guess that rule's no longer. But they have all these little rules. but they don't have a Trev Alberts rule. They don't care. Nobody cares about Trev Alberts other than people in Nebraska. I promise you, people at Texas A&M don't care about Trev Alberts. They aren't worried about that. It was good for a little joke and a story. If you're still worried about Trev Alberts on Friday, you don't care about basketball. You just so it's not a factor. I know Matt Rhule said he was mad about it. There's no reason to get mad about it. Nobody's going to worry about it. Nobody's going to ask about it Thursday at the press conferences. If they do, that's stupid. The players don't know Trev Alberts. They don't care. They're trying to win a game. I guarantee you the A&M players sure as hell don't know who he is, and they don't care either. So it was not done on purpose. Nobody in that room cares about Nebraska's problems. So I mean, it's funny though. It's funny that it happened twice.
What do you think, Sam? Coincidence?
I think it's a coincidence with the men. I think in the women's case, I don't know. I don't think it has anything to do with A&M. I think it's possible that the team that Creighton is playing is a lower seed than A&M, but there would have been a reason for UNLV and Nebraska not to play, and so because for a long time those two teams were paired together in a lot of different brackets, and it was like, yeah, that would be something you would want to avoid. So if you were going to ask me if Creighton had a better draw, I think they got a better first round draw than Nebraska did. Nebraska's the higher seed. Part of me wonders if, and I think Creighton deserved a higher seed, but part of me wonders if they swap seeds. That's kind of my thought process or something like that. But no, I don't think so. I think the men's draw was coincidental, maybe regional. You've got three teams all coming up from basically the same area of the state. So you've got some fan bases that might show up. Maybe there is a little bit of a regionalization there, but no, I don't think so. What is interesting is that both the Texas A&M men and the Texas A&M women are very similar teams. They're both pretty tall. They both rebound really well. Neither one of them are great shooting teams. I think Nebraska is better at both of those things than the teams they're playing. But at the same time, the two Texas A&M teams they're playing, and Wilson Moore wrote about this for today's paper, are actually kind of like stylistically challenging for Nebraska's teams. Like I would have loved to have seen Nebraska's men, for example, play a team that they can, that maybe is a little smaller and shoots the three, because Nebraska can defend the three pretty well. And I would have loved to have seen the Nebraska women. I think Nebraska women are going to win, so it doesn't make any difference. I think if Nebraska's women get past the first game, I like their draw. Nebraska's men, and maybe I'll defer to Tom here, I feel like they got a tall task. As I was looking through it, and as I was talking to Wilson about it, he's like, I've watched Nebraska all season long, and they kind of struggle with teams like this. And I'm like, yeah, you're kind of right. So I don't know what Tom thinks about that, but I feel like it's a challenging game for the Husker men.
Well, the challenge for Nebraska historically has been to show up for these games, and they don't show up. They don't, and I read about this for Friday. Everyone, I didn't see the 91 game, but everything I heard about 91, they went to Minneapolis and played Xavier. That was probably the best Nebraska team they've ever had. That was loaded, and Xavier beat them handily, and Nebraska just, I don't know if it was the bright lights but what Nebraska historically, the team you see during the season doesn't appear in the tournament for whatever reason. Guys who have made shots all season stop making shots, and people who have made plays stop making plays, and it's frustrating. I remember sitting there every year next to Lee, and we're just shaking our heads going, why are they doing this? This is not who these guys have been all year. It happens every single year. So they just got to show up. They got to, I think the good news for them is they've got a bunch of guys who know how to hit shots. So it's not relying on one or two guys who, if they start missing their shots, everything goes to hell. But they have other guys who can drive the basket and get fouled and hit threes. So but you got to show up. So yeah, I think it beat A&M, but A&M played in the tournament last year. They lost in Des Moines, and they got beat pretty bad. I'm sure they probably want to come out and, and uh, have a much better game. So we'll see. It's that's why we go and watch. It's you never know what you're going to see.
I wonder if the strengths of Nebraska offensively during the regular season are almost more of a hindrance in the postseason. And I say that just to say, like, you watch the NCAA tournament every year, and that's when the stars come out, right? Like, that's when in a close game late, the teams that advance have somebody that they know is going to be the guy to make the play, take the shot, do whatever. And I kind of feel like maybe we saw that a little bit in the Big Ten tournament where Illinois had a guy like that,
Right.
and they were able to ride him. And Nebraska, as much depth as they have and as many options as they have, like, sometimes I feel like in key moments that can kind of lead to guys maybe looking at each other a little bit, not knowing who that guy is going to be. So like that's one of the things that interests me the most is, like, I think there's an extra emphasis on maybe getting ahead because of that, and then also because of just the way that Texas Tech plays the game. They're not maybe going to be a team that can close the gap with a big, quick scoring run. I think that it would behoove Nebraska in a lot of ways, just beyond kind of the obvious reasons, to get ahead early, and that's going to really increase their chances.
Yeah. Yep. I agree.
That's an interesting thought there, Evan. I think in recent years, certainly the national champions tend to have a guy, right? So last year UConn had the guard who went to the NBA. Sonogo was sort of that, but it was really the guard. He was really, really good, but they were pretty complete. But if you look at the other three teams in the Final Four, San Diego State, Miami, and Florida Atlantic were pretty balanced teams. So I like, in my childhood, I think of like Miles Simon and Mike Bibby, and those two guys at Arizona winning a national championship. Most people couldn't name the other guys on that team. Maybe Tom can, but it was those two guys. And yes, so I think that was for a long time very true. But I do think Nebraska can win one game based on its balance. They have an opportunity to. The really good thing about the Huskers is if Casey's struggling, Bryce Williams might be on, CJ Wilcher might be on, and hopefully he's healthy again. I assume he will be. He's had a week to get rid of the flu, or food, whatever it was. Rink Mask might hit a three. Like with Nebraska, you don't have to hope that one guy is playing really well. You can use a little bit of balance. So I do think there's a chance for that. And then the other thing that I think about, other than the rebounding, which will be a challenge, is I do think Nebraska will have a little bit of a fan advantage down there. And I don't know if that'll work for or against them, but I do think they'll have a nice contingency in the arena. And so I think that the Husker fans will feel supported. Tom's been on more of these NCAA tournaments than I have. I don't know if Nebraska fans have traveled consistently well to the NCAA tournament games. It feels like this one you might get a nice big number, 5,000 that go down there versus, I don't know how many people went to Boise. I have no idea. I have no clue.
Nobody.
Yeah.
I mean, it was Minneapolis. They might have had some with Minneapolis. Again, I wasn't there. I wasn't here yet. Cincinnati, Syracuse, Long Island. We've had all the garden spots. Boise, which was actually kind of fun. And San Antonio, there were some fans in San Antonio, but that was the game where Tim Miles got thrown out, and he's watching the game in the Creighton locker room, and it's just it's just kind of one of those weird days. They gotta show up. They just gotta show up, and the fans might help, the fans might hurt. I don't know, but they gotta show up, and so I got my toothbrush packed. Mike Babcock, he had a great line back in the 90s. It might have been 98 or 90 for one of those years, but he said, "Yeah, I'm just gonna pack a toothbrush, Nebraska basketball, goes to the NCAA tournament, all you need is a toothbrush. So, ever since then, we've called it. I saw Lee this week, and he said, "You get your toothbrush back?" I said, "Yep." So we'll see how it goes. But I like the chances, but they gotta hit shots. That's the term is all about making shots. Fortunately for Nebraska, they got a lot of guys who can hit shots.
What do you guys think about this? So like Fred Hoiberg's coached in the NCAA tournament before. He's been to the Sweet 16 before. He's been in it as a player. Whereas you look at the roster that Nebraska has, and it's pretty much a new experience for these guys. Which one of those things do you think is more valuable this time of year, or maybe which of those things will have more of an effect on how you see Nebraska? Is it that lack of experience from the player side, or the fact that they have a coach who's done this before, who kind of knows what's coming this week?
Yeah, I thought about that, Evan, but he's not playing. He's coaching. He's not. He can't do it. He can't do it for them. They got to figure out how to do it themselves. And sometimes when you get a bunch of guys who've never been in the tournament, it's a good thing. They don't know what they don't know, but they got to. He can't. Maybe he can sense something about his team that isn't quite right before the game, or say something, tell a joke, or But as far as the scheme or X and O's, they've got to go hit shots. They got to get over it themselves. So I don't think his experience is going to help.
Yeah, I think it's an older team. That helps, right? Bryce Williams, I think, is in his fourth year. Rink Mass in his fourth year. Wilcher in his fourth year. Casey in his fifth year. These are all men. That probably helps a little bit, not just when the game starts, but in the preparation, the seriousness. Sometimes a freshman might think, and I think this was kind of true, like in the '90s. That one of Nebraska's teams in the '90s had a lot of freshmen on it. The one that had Strickland and Boone and Woolridge, and I don't know. I mean, I think they were probably figured they were going to do it 4 times, and so that kind of thing. So like teams that have a bunch of freshmen maybe are a little bit at a disadvantage there. But I think I like Nebraska's chances if they can rebound really well, and then if they can hit shots, like Tom said. I do really think it comes down to being able to hit some shots. And Fred on Sunday said, well, you got to defend it. I think that's all true. And I think they can defend A&M. Like A&M's not going to score 90 the way that Creighton would. So the question isn't how well you defend them. It's how well you keep them off the boards. I think they can force missed shots. Can they keep A&M off the boards? And I don't know. I think it's a coin flip. The line was like 1.5 to Nebraska. I don't know if it's moved at all. But it was close. Like it was basically a toss-up, like you would expect an 8-9 game to be. Now, if they win the game and they have to play Houston, well, that's a hell of a challenge. I mean, Houston is Texas A&M, and they can score. So, Houston can defend and they can score. They can do all kinds of stuff. And anybody who was watching them play Iowa State, don't take a lot from, like, be impressed with Iowa State for sure, but don't think that that's the Houston team Nebraska's going to see. The Houston team Nebraska will see will be, very good. And so if Nebraska were to manage to win their first game ever, and we won't be doing another podcast between the 2 games, but if they manage to do it, they got a heck of a challenge on what would be Sunday. That'd be a tough one.
Okay, so you mentioned Nebraska. I mean, everyone knows, obviously, they haven't won an NCAA tournament game. Do you think, is there a psychological component to this game in the sense that the players know kind of what's on the line? Like, I think back, I'm a Cubs fan, right? And I think back over the years, like even when free agents would come in, they'd be like, yeah, we know the Cubs have never won a World Series, blah, blah, blah. And like that would sort of soak into their psyche, right? Like they knew about it in that place. These players at Nebraska know the situation. Like, how have they been able to maybe change the narrative already with what they've done this year? And do you think that continues, or is that weight of having not won a game something that you would factor into how things would go?
I don't think they've changed the narrative at all. I mean, it's still out there. I mean, 94 team won the Big 8 tournament. Did that mean that didn't change the narrative? They went and laid an egg. 98 had a hell of a team. Just no, it doesn't change the narrative. It's still there, but these guys may not care about it. That they aren't from here. Like you said, they know about it, but maybe that's one area where Fred can help. Just reminding them that you aren't those other Nebraska teams. You don't have a history. I've won. It's not that hard. You just got to go do it and just kind of settle them down. But um, I don't sense. I mean, I'll be anxious to be around on Thursday, but I don't sense this team is cares about pressure, and they don't really. I think they got a bunch of bulldogs that go out and play. So they just go out and do that. They should be fine. But the ball is going to go in the basket.
I agree with Tom. This team's handled pressure pretty well this year. Like when you think about the games that they felt like they had to win, they had to beat Indiana on the road. They did it. They had to beat Michigan. Like there was a sense of like, okay, this is the game that kind of like gets you over the top. They did it, and they did it handily. And then when they played Friday, I felt like there was some pressure there too. Like, let's not come here and crap all over ourselves and then go and then leave any doubt, right? And they played maybe their best half of the year. I mean, they were up 50-27 at half, and they made every shot under the sun. I think, and nothing that happened on Saturday against Illinois was about pressure. That people who think, oh, you should never lose a 15-point lead. I mean, anybody who watches the NCAA tournament knows that stuff happens all the time. So Illinois is really good. I still think they have a chance to make the Final Four. And so Nebraska didn't crumble to pressure on Saturday. They really didn't. They lost to a better team. So I think they've handled pressure actually quite well all year. So I agree with Tom. I don't think that's going to kick into gear. I think it's just going to be, can you do the things that your coach tells you to do? Can you make shots? And I just don't know how to, like, when I saw the draw, of course I thought of Trev. I was like, oh God. But then I was like, let me look this team up, because I watched them a couple times and I'm like, yeah, this is a team that Nebraska could beat by 20 or could lose to by 10. It's just up in the air. It's I would have rather seen them play a team that was, I don't know, more palatable to their, like if they were playing Clemson or South Carolina, even though those teams are 6 seeds, I would feel better about it because they're better than both those teams. But A&M's physical and aggressive, and there are a bunch of other things too. So we'll see what happens.
I mean,
Sam, okay, go
not
ahead.
to say my concern, and it probably it won't. Maybe it doesn't. It's not a factor at all. But if I had one concern is after before Illinois, which is like Sam said is really good. Nebraska's played Indiana, Michigan, Rutgers, Ohio State, Minnesota, Indiana, Penn State, Michigan. You could go back to February 7th. They're at Northwestern. It's been that long since they played somebody really good.
Yeah.
These other teams aren't that good. I mean, they have their moments. Minnesota's had their moments. Ohio State's had their moments. But these were not top-tier teams. So they haven't played a lot of top-tier teams lately. So when they played Illinois, they looked pretty good early, right? They had every chance to win that game. So, maybe it means nothing, but they're gonna have to ramp it up on Friday, because the Big Ten that wasn't very good at the bottom. So, but I think once you get in these games, you match the level of intensity or the level of talent. So, I think they'll be fine. But I think that's just worth something. That's worth pointing out. They haven't been through a lot of tough tests in the last month.
Then it's Sam and Tom, if you want to weigh in too, real quick on the women's side, like you've kind of broken down a little bit about the game. What would a tournament win mean for Amy Williams, for the program? Maybe put that in perspective, sort of like we kind of know what's at stake with the men.
Just momentum for the program and an opportunity to go to the Sweet 16. I think a lot of Oregon State, but I think Nebraska's got a chance there, if they can get to the second round. The first game is in some ways a stylistic clash that Nebraska just has to get through. And then if you get to Oregon State, who's a good team. I mean, I'm a AP women's voter, so like I know them pretty good, but Nebraska can beat that team. Like there's things about Nebraska's defense that make it possible to beat that team. They have a wonderful post player named Reagan Beers. You know what? Nebraska does too. And those two players can cancel each other out. And that's their best player. And Nebraska's best player, in my opinion, remains Jazz Shelley. And I think Nebraska's got the best player in the region. Best player. In that little sub-region in Jazz. And so you never know. They have a chance. You know, they've got to figure out how to win the first game, momentum. And then I don't know. I don't think it sets up too poorly for them if they were to advance, you know, beyond that. It's not like the hardest road from there, but I would anticipate them, you know, kind of being done after that if they're able to make the Sweet 16. I don't know. So, you know, I think it's not bad. The 2 seed on that side is unique. So if Nebraska made it to the Sweet 16, most people are not sure the 2 seed will be there. Notre Dame is the number 2, but a lot of people are picking Ole Miss to beat them because Notre Dame for the second straight year has major injury, and they may not make it out of their pot. And so it's possible that Ole Miss will be there in the next round. So you just never know. I mean, it can open up for Nebraska if they can win the first game. They got to find a way to do it.
The Big Ten is one of the best leagues in women's basketball, and we just saw Nebraska go to the final, go to overtime, and coulda, woulda, shoulda, you know, won the trophy. They need to go to the Sweet 16. In Jazz Shelley's last year, go get a little legacy. Go get it. This team's good enough to do it.
Yep.
You know, one's not enough. They need to go get 2. Of course, you got to get 1 first. Yeah, I mean, this team's good enough to go to Sweet 16. It's a top 16 team, I believe. So I think that certainly not a disappointing year. They've had a very good year, but go finish it right. I think they need to be in the Sweet 16.
Okay, let's talk a little football. We're well into this podcast, and we haven't talked about spring football, which happens to start. Practices begin Sunday, Monday, coming up here in the next few days for Nebraska. We heard from Matt Rhule, who spoke at length about the state of Husker athletics. Really not a ton of football talk necessarily. A little bit about some of the position battles, but very much so more about sort of state of the athletic department and what a place Lincoln is to live and how his family's invested. It was a really, I thought, inspired speech. You could tell he wanted to get it off his chest. It was something a lot of, I think, Husker fans needed to hear. If you haven't, watched that or read about that, be sure to do that. I guess, how important was that moment in your guys' mind? What Matt Rhule laid out, especially before we got into the football perspective of it, and how much of that is reality, right? Because he has a way of having kind of a certain perspective on things. How much of what he said was important, and how much of it did you agree with?
I thought it was one of his most important moments since he's been here, if not his most important moment. He was, I mean, standing in the middle of the chaos, the hurricane. The 2 people who hired him are gone. What are you going to do, Matt? How are you going to react? If he'd come out and just gave a statement, you know, I support the university, so on and so, hire a good AD, blah blah blah, and then took questions about quarterbacks and tight ends, I'd have been worried. That's not a guy who wants to be here. The whole thing needed to be the state of Nebraska, state of Matt Rhule, you know, and he knew it. He knew that. He embraced the moment. He knocked it out of the park. People needed to hear him to say all those things. They needed to hear him speak from the heart. and not just about, okay, my wife's got a business and my son's coming here, but the whole farmer thing, the whole growth, development. I mean, he's speaking to the essence of Nebraska. So he felt like there was this deep connection, and that needed to be conveyed, and he did it perfectly. And um, not just for the fans, but for recruits and for the athletic directors out there. People were paying attention to this. What's this guy going to do? Is he going to leave, or is he bought in, or And he was 100% bought in. I guarantee you that was the best thing he could have ever done. I think it absolutely impacted the AD search. I think that I left that press conference more optimistic than I'd been all over a week because of the way he handled that and the message. And I was ready to ask him if he wanted to be the AD. I mean that's how good it was. He should be the AD, right? So I felt like it was the biggest moment of his Nebraska tenure, and he absolutely nailed it.
Agree with all that. Yeah, I think that's accurate. Maybe the other emotion that I had is that if you're going to have your football coach out there in front like that for 12 minutes, as doing what he was doing, which was leading the athletic department. Everybody was kind of like, what's Coach Rhule going to say? And then you get that 12 minutes, 10 minutes or whatever it was, and it how galvanizing that would have been for other coaches in the department, how encouraging that wall would have felt, given Trev Albert's departure. I think the other feeling that I had though is, when you have a football coach willing to make that passionate statement, and also includes the words unabashed, urgent, invest, 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 he's also sending a message about what the expectations will be, not only for the new AD, but for the administration as a whole. And this cannot be one of those moments where Nebraska shrinks back because they feel they're wounded by Albert's departure. So, I think he also set a tone, and the tone was, hey, we're not going backward. Everything here is good. We need to keep moving forward. Do not be afraid. Unabashed was the word he said. And I think part of what Matt Rhule probably sees that other people see is like Nebraska does not have to take a back seat to any other athletic department. And I think he wants that to be the way it is here. But you need leaders who, at the very least, can empower him to fulfill his full vision. And what you prefer is somebody who's walking alongside him. And so I'm sure that both the interim president, Chris Gaborik, and the regents and the governor and any potential candidates heard that and were like, okay, I know what I'm getting. And the regents are going to name a priority candidate tomorrow. So almost always that person becomes the president. So, we may know by Wednesday afternoon who might be running things.
Do you think that name is one that Trev Alberts knew and that maybe had any impact on his decision, or is that in a response to, hey, let's move this search along, and now they've identified somebody?
I feel strongly it's in response, but I don't know that for sure.
Yeah,
I think that Henry Cordes listed off some of the names in one of his stories, so we can rattle off those names for sure. Jeffrey Gold, who is the UNMC chancellor, and has presided over an extraordinary expansion over here in 42nd Street here in Omaha. Brian Sloan, who's a Chamber of Commerce. Somebody reached out to Mike Flood and asked him if he'd be interested. He declined. And then, another name I've heard out there is Ben Sass. Now, Ben Sass just took the job at Florida. I don't know what the dynamics are there. Ben is a native Nebraskan, grew up in Fremont, but the job wasn't open when he decided to become president.
And Sam, I wanted to ask you this too. I know it's been a few days, but you talked with Trev on the phone. Is there anything about that conversation that you found particularly enlightening, or that sort of adds to the conversation about the transition that's going on?
a lot of things were really enlightening. I think what I would say is that, the leadership component at Nebraska has to be right. And I've kind of written what I thought. And so like what I think is his departure is different from some of the other departures and firings because it's not a firing. And so imagine that circumstance where you come home and your spouse took the suitcase and they're gone. And maybe you knew something was up, but they're gone. And so like you're either going to change or you're going to be like, okay, we're just going to sink back into wherever we've been and keep doing the same things over and over and put it on him. And some people will do that. Some people will say it's Trev's fault. He left, he's being disloyal. I understand that. If the media wants to do that, I totally understand it. What I would say is that the leadership can't spend much time there. They have to think about, okay, this is the whatever you want to call it, the repercussions of things that have been happening. And that's one thing. The other thing that I thought, and I wrote this too, was that when Trev Alberts was no longer answering to the chancellor, the Board of Regents put themselves in this conundrum because when the AD answered to the chancellor, you had this setup where like, okay, the chancellor goes, but you still got a president. You kind of like have two bosses, right? Like maybe the president's your boss, maybe the chancellor's your boss, but rarely are two people going to be gone at once, right? Like they're not both going to be vacant or interims. When they moved it out from the chancellor has nothing to say. Like the chancellor's not hiring the AD. The chancellor can't begin a search. Rodney Bennett can't begin a search. No one can really begin a search until they have a president. And so they created this, like Trev wanted to answer to the president, but then Ted Carter leaves and then there's a gap and you create this problem that they now have. They have to have a president in place. And the difference is that a lot of times your presidents are picked by an elected board. And that's what they are. Your chancellor is picked by a president. And oftentimes that person is not quite as high profile. So by moving the athletic department out from under the chancellor's purview, they actually created this vacuum that they could not resolve by bringing Rodney Bennett in. And so I think ironically, what Trev wanted most, I think, is probably what ended up frustrating him the most too.
Yeah, I think the lesson here is it should go back to the way it was. I mean, that was a Ted Carter thing. That was Trev saying, I don't know, maybe I don't know the chancellor, but I know Ted and we connect, we think alike. And so I just want to go right to him. And the Regents, as they've given Trev everything he wanted, right? So I don't buy anything. I don't buy any of this stuff that he was upset with the Regents but it's probably a lesson, go back to like you said, if the chancellor leaves, there's always a president, then you can fall back on that. But the AD chancellor thing has worked for a long time. Why not just go back to that? But that's not my area, and they're not going to listen to me. So, but I do find it interesting that they're going to identify candidate tomorrow, right after Rhule's comments. So, that's power. But I thought it was necessary too. After Governor Pillen, came out and pointed fingers at the Regents, it was a bad look for the school and the state. I mean, it just made it very dysfunctional, or it ended the chaos of the moment. So hopefully tomorrow they'll give a candidate. We can all take a deep breath, and then they can go get an AD, and then everybody will move on.
So that AD that they'll go toward, and Matt Rhule gave some insight into what he's looking for in the next AD. He said he'd be grateful to have input, and as would other coaches in how that search may play out, but understands that people have to make decisions. He used words like urgency, doer, figure it out. Do you guys think Nebraska needs another AD in the mold of Trev Alberts, who was very big picture minded, forward thinking, or they need somebody who's an AD and does that job. And it's maybe not quite as widespread or varying of a degree of duties as Trev Alberts had.
I don't, Sam wrote about this. I don't think Nebraska should ever have a caretaker AD. I think Nebraska's a big enough dog in college athletics. They should always have a doer. They should always have somebody who's going to go fight, like Rhule said, and who wants to be on the committees and get involved in the college football playoff and NIL and be out there fighting on the the front lines. I always think Nebraska should have that kind of AD. Now they've had a couple caretaker guys over the years, but they don't need that. They need somebody like Rhule said. So, and there's ways to do it also where you're that kind of a guy who has vision and you're fighting and you're on the front lines, but it's not about you. It's not a big ego deal. You're not always in front of a camera. You can do all that behind the scenes. I don't think the AD should be the celebrity at Nebraska. I think that the head coaches ought to be the show. So and that goes for the chancellor and the president too, and everybody else. But you can get that guy who's not going to be out in front of cameras, but is going to be out in front of the athletes and the coaches.
Yeah, I think Tom makes really good points. I'll divide my answer, I think, in a couple different categories, Evan. So I think the first thing I would say is that, any athletic director who comes in is going to have to work with Matt Rhule as the head coach of the highest profile sport. And I mean this in the right way. That person, whoever that person is, has to go to Matt Rhule and say, okay, now I know you're an innovative person and I'm an innovative person. Tell me how we can best work together to be innovative together. Like, do you want to be the ideator? Do you want me to be the ideator? Like, that conversation will have to happen. Like, because Rhule is a hard charging and idea driven person. And to be clear, I think Rhule will be the kind of guy that's like, what he thinks in 2024 about what he needs for his football program may not be what he needs in 2026. And he may change that. And so, like, whoever you get in that role has to be adaptable to Rhule's personality. And then Rhule has to be able to say, in this area, I want you to push and I will stay back, that kind of thing. And then I think you need somebody who is a voice in the Big Ten. And that's where the argument for an established AD, and Tom brought up Jamie Pollard, he's not in the Big Ten, he's in the Big 12, but that's where the argument for an established AD helps you, because it's hard for a brand new AD to walk into a context and throw any weight around. Now, if you hired I'm not saying Jamie Pollard, but a Jamie Pollard type who's been around a long time, they're going to walk in, they're going to know everybody in the room. And that person might have a different voice. Remember, we got 4 new teams coming to the Big Ten, and none of those ADs have ever been in the Big Ten. So, that's something to consider. And then I think the third thing is just the one thing that I think Trev did in the 2.5 years he was there, for sure, is he just did a really, really good job of putting Nebraska in good financial shape while simultaneously gently pressing the coaches down there to start winning more. And Sean Eichhorst was all about the student athlete experience. And Bill Moose was, Bill's a great guy. I don't know that Bill was terribly engaged with the winning and the losing part on campus. Trev came in and cared about the money, but he also cared about the winning. And he was at a lot of sporting events. That's the last piece, is that I think these coaches have gotten used to having their butts kicked a little bit. And they need to continue to get that kicked a little bit. Like, John Cook doesn't, but some of the other people who haven't been as successful as John Cook benefited from Trev Alberts pushing them. And so those are the things that I would say.
One more football one for you guys. What's give me one non-quarterback related spring football storyline that you guys are going to be looking to see the next couple of months.
Well, I'll give you a couple. Leadership on the field and in the locker room. Who this is the everybody's been through 1 year rule. They know what to expect. Like he says, they're going to demand more and expect more, but that just can't come from the coaches. It's got to come from the players. Ty Robinson, the polar bear, guys like that, older guys who've been through this and chose to come back. I'm curious, who's going to lead this team. I've compared this, probably not in a good way, to the '97 team with Jason Peter and Grant Wistrom coming back for the extra year, and you knew who was in charge. They took over in January. It was their team the whole year. I'd like to see somebody like that come up and step forward and in the spring. Dylan Rayola's leadership. I think he's the guy. Is he going to be timid and sit back and okay, I have to know my place, or is he going to get out there and take charge of the offense? I'll be curious of that. And I think they need a running game. They need to help Rayola next year. They need the offensive line. Looks like it's going to be better. There are a lot of guys back. Identify a running back or two and go. They build that running game, and that's going to be very, very important next year.
Yeah, I'll add on to what Tom said right there at the very end. Running back is their skill players on the offensive side of the ball. So if you look at what Michigan and Washington and Texas and Alabama, who they were last year, Ohio State, they have elite skill. They have elite tight ends. They have elite receivers. Best receiver in the draft, in my opinion, has actually now become the guy at Washington instead of Marvin Harrison. You gotta have great skill play. If you want to have the kind of quarterback that they do, and they want Dylan Raiola has got a massive amount of talent, but they are not going to ask Dylan Raiola, if in their ideal world, they're not going to ask him to run around and run the ball 12 times a game and scramble around like God only knows who. I don't know. They want him to be in the pocket and they want him to throw the football. And if you want to do those things, your receivers and your tight ends need to win, and your running backs need to make people miss tackles. Any good offensive line might get you 4 yards. They'll open a 4-yard gain for you. Maybe sometimes 7. After that, it's up to the running back. And I just don't think Nebraska's had running backs that consistently break tackles or make people miss. They got to find that. I think it's, for all of my life until the last 8 years, Nebraska was running back you. From the time I was a little kid and I was watching Mike Rozier and Jeff Smith to the 3rd or 4th year I was on the beat and Amir Abdullah was the running back. Nebraska had the best running backs in the country, collegiately, maybe not in the NFL, but collegiately. And that changed. And they got to get that back. There's no reason why they can't, but they haven't had it now for a decade. When Amir Abdullah left the building, it's like they lost the ability to develop that player. They got to go find him and they got to develop him.
I'll add one more. I thought Matt Rhule had an interesting thought, because there's so much focus on all the mid-year additions, right? You got the transfers, the freshmen that have early enrolled, but he kind of called out the older guys and said, hey, we need some of these older guys to take another jump. And I think that's something that has held Nebraska back over the years, has been their older guys. Once they hit maybe their junior year, they kind of plateau and they kind of have been who they've been. And so what could it look like with another year for Ty Robinson in there, or Tommy Hill in there, Bryce Benhart, and Isaac Gifford, who came back? Does Jamari Butler have another step forward to take? Marquise Buford is healthy. We heard from him on Monday. So I think that's a really interesting group where they were productive, but now that they have another year, another off season in this system, in this nutrition and strength training, what's that next step look like? And does that start to emerge now? And so the conversation can be about those guys as opposed to simply the talent that they added. So I think that part will be interesting to follow as well. All right, last thing for you guys, if you want to call your shot for Nebraska basketball and give a national champion, who do you have going all the way in your brackets?
Oh, I picked Nebraska to win one game. They won't beat Houston, but who cares? You beat A&M and you get that history. They'll be partying on the Beale Street all night. So I think this will be a trip to remember. And I've got UConn. I don't think anybody beats UConn. Oh,
Yeah, UConn is my national champion. Damn shame that Iowa State is in their bracket. I don't know what happened there. That's too bad. Because I don't think Iowa State will beat them. But it would have been fun. It'd be fun to see Iowa State in the Final Four. I think they've earned that. They've had a great program, but they've never made it there except for like 1945, and that doesn't really count. I'll be honest. I'm gonna say Nebraska wins the game. I don't love the matchup, and I think that it's going to be a battle. It's going to be 63, 60, 62 or something. It's going to be just a slugfest. And maybe Nebraska survives it, maybe they don't. But I want to add one more thing, okay? Because I'm doing this in my bracket. I'm picking every 11 seed to beat every 6. It's the weakest group of 6 seeds I've ever seen.
Okay.
South Carolina, Clemson, BYU, and Texas Tech. And I'm like taking all the 11s. So
Right. I like it.
there you go.
I think Nebraska wins too. I think it feels like this could be a Casey game. Like he rises to the occasion in these kind of moments. I feel like this could be a coming out party on a national level for him potentially. And then, I always try to pick a little, I don't know how offbeat of a national champion this is, but I like what Arizona's done this year as a 2 seed. I think that's a team that maybe has the pedigree, but has been slept on a little bit. I like their path too. So I'm going to say Arizona, but who knows? It's March Madness. We're going to be watching along with everybody else. So I think that's it for this podcast for Tom and Sam. I'm Evan. Enjoy the madness. Enjoy Nebraska. Maybe they're going to make history this week. We'll be back to talk about it next week and a whole bunch of other stuff. Until then, thanks for listening.